4 people went quiet, not by choice, not by malfunction. What was about to happen to them was the most dangerous part of the entire mission. The capsule they have lived in for 10 days is about to hit the edge of Earth's atmosphere. Not mission control, not their families, not anyone on Earth can get through. You have watched these 4 people for 10 days. You watched Reed Wiseman photograph the Earth through a small window 250,000 miles from home. You watched Jeremy Hansen's voice break as he named a crater on the moon after someone he loved and lost. You watched them float and work and look out at something no human being has seen in over 50 years. In the final 13 minutes of a 10-day journey, they faced the most dangerous thing the mission had to offer. It was not the launch, it was not the blackout behind the moon, it was not the distance record, it was coming home. If this is your first time watching this channel, we cover the science behind events like this one, events that matter told with the accuracy they deserve. Subscribing takes 2 seconds, and it means you will not miss what comes next. Now, let's talk about what happened. Most people assume the dangerous part of a moon mission is getting there. The rocket, the launch, the moment the engines light and everything shakes. That feels like the risk. The return feels like the reward. A capsule drifting down on parachutes, splashing into the ocean, mission complete. That assumption is wrong. Reentry is the most physically violent event of this entire mission. The Artemis II crew experienced it firsthand. The moment reentry begins, the Orion capsule hits the top of Earth's atmosphere, travelling at 23,840 miles per hour. That is Mach 31. To put that in terms you can feel, New York to Los Angeles in under 7 seconds. Not 7 minutes, 7 seconds. The crew had travelled 695,081 total miles over 10 days, and now, in 13 minutes, they had to shed almost all of that speed. The atmosphere did it for them. That is the point. That is the design. But the price of that deceleration is enormous. When a spacecraft hits the atmosphere at that speed, the air in front of it cannot get out of the way fast enough. It compresses, it heats, it becomes something that is no longer air. It becomes plasma, a glowing, electrically charged shell of superheated gas surrounding the entire capsule. The temperature of that plasma reaches 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That is roughly half the temperature of the surface of the Sun. Nothing in the human world operates at 5,000 degrees. Steel melts at around 2,500, titanium at around 3,000. The material protecting this crew has to absorb heat that would vaporize most metals. It does that by vaporizing itself. The heat shield on the Orion capsule is 16.5 feet wide, about the width of a 2-car garage door, shaped into a disc and fixed to the bottom of the capsule. It is coated in a material called avcoat. Avcoat does not simply resist heat. It ablates, meaning it burns away in a slow, controlled manner, carrying the heat with it as it goes. The outer layer sacrifices itself so the inner capsule stays cool. Engineering has a word for this kind of system. It is called a consumable shield. It is designed to be destroyed. While that shield was doing its job, the crew inside could not see a single thing outside their windows. The plasma surrounding the capsule was brighter than daylight, a wall of orange and white fire visible from the ground below. But the windows were blocked. The crew was in a sealed, shaking, decelerating container with nothing to do but wait. And they were waiting under pressure. Literally. As Orion decelerated from that speed towards something survivable, the forces inside the cabin built. The crew was pressed into their seats at up to 3.9 Gs. That is nearly 4 times the force of normal gravity. A person who weighs 180 pounds on Earth effectively weighed 700 pounds in that capsule during peak deceleration. You cannot lift your arms at 3.9 Gs. You can breathe, barely. You can move your eyes. You wait. The last time a crewed American spacecraft entered the atmosphere this fast was more than 50 years ago. The Apollo crews returning from the moon hit re-entry at similar speeds. Every mission since then, the Space Shuttle, the Soyuz capsules, the SpaceX Dragon, returned from low Earth orbit, not deep space. Not deep space. Low Earth orbit re-entry is gentler. The speeds are lower. The heating is lower. The forces are lower. Artemis II is in a different category entirely. And during the most intense part of that re-entry, for approximately 5 minutes, Mission Control in Houston had no contact with the crew. No voice, no data, no telemetry, nothing. The same plasma that was protecting the capsule from burning up was also surrounding it in a shell of electrically charged gas that blocked every radio frequency, every wavelength. No signal of any kind could pass through it in either direction. The crew could not call Houston. Houston could not call the crew. The instruments that normally feed data back to Earth, pressure readings, temperature readings, heat shield performance, went dark. This is not a malfunction. It is not a design flaw. It is physics. It is the same phenomenon that has affected every spacecraft returning from high-speed reentry since the beginning of the space age. Engineers plan for it. They schedule around it. They watch the clock and wait for the signal to come back. But knowing it is coming does not make the silence shorter. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman said it at the April 8th press conference, the night before splashdown. He said, and these are his exact words, "I'll breathe easier when we get through re-entry and everybody's under chutes and in the water." That is the head of NASA, not a cautious spokesperson reading from a script, the administrator, saying plainly that re-entry is the moment he has been waiting to get past. That quote is the most honest thing said about this mission in 10 days. The heat shield flying tonight was already used once. What it looked like when it came back alarmed the people who built it. At some point during those 5 minutes of silence, the capsule passed through peak heating. The shield was at maximum ablation. The plasma was brightest. The G-forces were highest. And then, gradually, the capsule slowed. The plasma thinned. The frequencies opened back up. And Mission Control heard the crew again. 13 minutes after re-entry began, Orion hit the water off the coast of San Diego. The hard part was over. Or so the viewer would assume. But the heat shield on Orion tonight is not the shield that was built for this mission. It is the same shield that flew on Artemis I in 2022. And when engineers opened that capsule after its first flight, they found something that sent the program into 4 years of intensive analysis. They did not call it damage. They had a different word for what they found. And that word, and what it meant for this crew, is what the next part of this story is about. The heat shield worked on Artemis I. The capsule came back. The crew, and in that case there was no crew, it was an uncrewed test flight, was safe. Mission accomplished. That is what the public was told. And it was true. What was not told, at least not loudly, was what engineers found when they got the capsule back to the lab and started looking closely at the shield itself. EVCoat is designed to ablate evenly. A thin layer sacrificing itself uniformly across the entire shield surface. That evenness is everything. If the ablation is uniform, the heat is distributed uniformly. The underlying capsule structure stays within its rated temperature limits. Everyone goes home. After Artemis I, the ablation was not uniform. Large chunks of EVCoat had sheared away from the shield surface during re-entry. Not a thin, controlled burn. Chunks. Physical pieces of the material breaking free and separating from the shield mid-descent. In some areas, the shield had lost significantly more material than the design predicted. In other areas, it had lost less. The pattern was uneven, irregular, unexpected, and that unevenness is the problem. When one section of a heat shield loses more material than it should, the insulating layer in that area becomes thinner. A thinner layer means less protection. Less protection means higher temperatures reaching the base of the capsule. The base of the capsule connects directly to the crew module. The crew module is where the astronauts sit. Engineers have a tolerance, a maximum temperature the capsule's base structure is rated to handle before the integrity of the vehicle is compromised. The Artemis I data showed that in some locations, temperatures were approaching limits that made engineers deeply uncomfortable. Not breaching them, approaching them. For an uncrewed mission, approaching a limit is a serious finding. For a crewed mission, it becomes something else entirely. NASA and Lockheed Martin, the prime contractor for the Orion spacecraft, spent 4 years on this problem. Testing, modelling, analysis, debate. The question was specific. Was the EVCoat chunking a one-time anomaly? Or was it a repeatable characteristic of this heat shield design? If it was an anomaly, you document it, monitor it, and fly again. If it was repeatable, you have a structural problem that has to be solved before you put humans inside that capsule. The answer they arrived at was neither clean nor simple. The chunking appeared to be related to a specific re-entry profile, the trajectory, the angle, the speed at which the capsule entered the atmosphere. The Artemis I mission used what is called a skip re-entry, a profile where the capsule briefly dips into the upper atmosphere, bounces back out like a stone skipping on water, and then commits to its final descent. That skip profile generated internal heating patterns that contributed to the uneven EVCoat loss. So NASA made a decision. They would not replace the heat shield for Artemis II. The same physical shield that flew on Artemis I, inspected, analysed and cleared, would fly again. But the trajectory would change. A steeper, more direct entry profile. No skip. A different angle designed to reduce the internal heating that caused the problem the first time. A new shield is already being built for the next crew. This one was never meant to fly twice. Think about what that means in practical terms. At that speed, the difference between a safe re-entry and a catastrophic one is measured in fractions of a degree of entry angle. Too shallow, and the capsule skips off the atmosphere entirely, sailing back into space with no way home. Too steep and the deceleration forces become unsurvivable, and the heat builds faster than the shield can manage. The window between those two outcomes is narrow, extremely narrow. NASA changed the trajectory to fix a heat shield problem. That means the fix depends entirely on hitting that narrow window with precision, every time with no margin for error, using a modified flight path that has never been flown with crew aboard. A new heat shield is already being manufactured for Artemis III. That is not a minor detail. That is NASA acknowledging in the most concrete way possible that the current shield is a temporary solution. The long-term fix is a redesign. But the long-term fix was not ready in time for this mission, and so 4 people flew tonight on the short-term solution. The scale of the engineering confidence required here is worth sitting with for a moment. The modified trajectory has been modelled thousands of times in simulation. The heat shield has been tested in laboratories at the temperatures it will face. The avcoat analysis has been reviewed by multiple independent teams. NASA cleared this vehicle to fly. They did not do it casually, they did not do it quickly. 4 years is a long time to analyse a single component, but simulation is not flight. Models are not atmosphere. And the gap between the two is where engineering history has been made, sometimes triumphantly, sometimes not. The person who knows this better than anyone is Rick Henfling. He is the Artemis II entry flight director. He ran the re-entry from Houston. He was the man watching the screens when the signal went dark. He was the man counting the minutes until it came back. At the April 8th press conference, Henfling said the program was planning for what he called a nominal entry, meaning everything goes exactly as designed. He said it with confidence. He also said, "We really have a well-functioning spacecraft." He said it the night before the flight, not after. That shift in understanding changes something closer to home. The viewer watching this tonight is not an engineer. They cannot read the thermal analysis reports. They cannot evaluate the trajectory modelling. What they can do is listen to the people who can. And what those people said in the days leading up to this mission was careful, measured, confident in their work, but careful. NASA Deputy Associate Administrator Lakeisha Hawkins said it directly at the same briefing. "When the mission goes well," she said, "it can look like flying to the moon is easy. It certainly is not." She added something else. She said, "We can't forget that this is a test flight, with 4 people aboard, using a heat shield that flew once before, under conditions that alarmed the engineers who examined it afterward." NASA cleared it. They had good reasons. They had 4 years of data behind that decision. That decision was either validated or it was not. The answer is coming. But before we get there, before the heat shield data comes back from the recovery team, there is a second system that had to work perfectly tonight. A system that takes over the moment the heat shield's job is done. It has 11 separate components. They all have to open in the correct sequence, within seconds of each other, over the dark Pacific Ocean, with the crew having absolutely no ability to intervene if something goes wrong. The signal came back. Houston heard the crew, and the instinct for anyone watching was to exhale. It felt like the finish line. It is not the finish line. The capsule at that point is still travelling at approximately 300 miles per hour. It is still falling. It is over the Pacific Ocean in the dark, and the only thing standing between 4 astronauts and a water impact at fatal speed is a parachute system that no human hand can touch. Here is what most people picture when they think of a spacecraft splashdown. A capsule drifting gently down from a clear sky. 1 or 2 large orange parachutes billowing above it. A slow, peaceful descent into calm water. Recovery ships nearby. Helicopters circling. Cheerful voices on the radio. That picture is not wrong. It is just the last 30 seconds of a 4-minute sequence that is far more complicated than it looks. The Orion parachute system is the most complex ever flown on a piloted spacecraft. 11 separate parachutes, 3 distinct deployment phases. Each phase triggers automatically by altitude sensors. No crew input, no manual override, no human decision-making at any point. The crew cannot pull a handle. They cannot delay a deployment. They cannot speed one up. From the moment the first parachute fires to the moment the capsule hits the water, the crew are passengers, entirely. They can watch the altimeter. They can listen to the sequence unfold. They cannot change a single thing about it. That is the design. It has to be. The sequence happens too fast for human reaction times to be useful. It begins at 36,000 feet. 3 small parachutes called pilot chutes fire from the top of the capsule. Their only job is to pull a protective cover off the main parachute storage bay. They do not slow the capsule. They do not stabilize it. They open a door. Without that step happening correctly, the rest of the sequence cannot begin. At 24,000 feet, 2 drogue parachutes deploy. Each one is 23 feet wide. Together they have one critical job, stabilizing the capsule. At 300 miles per hour, the Orion capsule is not falling cleanly. It is tumbling, rotating. The drogues arrest that rotation and orient the capsule correctly for the main chute deployment. If the drogues fail to deploy or deploy asymmetrically with one opening fully and one not, the capsule continues to tumble. A tumbling capsule cannot deploy its main parachute safely. The geometry is wrong. The forces are wrong. Everything downstream of that failure point becomes a problem with no good solution. If one drogue chute fails to open fully, the main parachutes cannot deploy safely. The crew has no override. Between 8,000 feet and 4,000 feet, the 3 main parachutes inflate. Each one is 116 feet wide. To picture that, 116 feet is taller than a 10-story building, 3 of them, opening in stages, catching air over the dark Pacific. Together they are designed to slow the capsule from 300 miles per hour to somewhere between 17 and 20 miles per hour by the time it reaches the water. 17 miles per hour feels gentle, and at the surface, in the final seconds, it is. But getting from 300 to 17 requires each of those 3 main parachutes to inflate correctly, fully, and in the right sequence. They do not all open at once. They inflate in stages, partially at 8,000 feet, more fully as the capsule descends, reaching full inflation by 4,000 feet. The staging is intentional. Opening all 3 fully at once would generate a deceleration force so sudden it could injure the crew. So the system is precise in both directions. Open too slow, and the capsule hits the water too fast. Open too fast, and the deceleration itself becomes the injury mechanism. The margin between those 2 outcomes is just as narrow. Now imagine one of those parachutes fails to inflate fully. Not complete failure. Not a parachute that does not open at all. A partial inflation. One chute billowing at 60% of its designed area instead of 100. The math changes immediately. The total braking force drops. The capsule arrives at the water faster than designed. How much faster depends on how partial the failure is. But at even 50 miles per hour, less than a third of the speed before the mains open, a water impact delivers a force that the crew survival system is not rated to absorb cleanly. The crew cannot intervene. They know this going in. They trained for it. They accepted it as a condition of the mission. But acceptance is not the same as comfort. The recovery team has a protocol for conditions that fall outside the expected. They call it contingency egress. There is one more thing about splashdown that the clean, peaceful mental image leaves out. Orion does not always land right side up. The capsule can hit the water on its side. It can land inverted, completely upside down, with the heat shield facing up and the parachute attachment point submerged. When that happens, the crew is hanging in their harnesses above the water, inside an overturned capsule in the middle of the ocean at night. This is not a catastrophic outcome. It is a planned-for outcome. Orion is equipped with airbags that deploy on water contact and flip the capsule upright. The system is designed, it has been tested, but it adds time to the recovery sequence. It adds complexity to the moment when the recovery divers arrive. Those divers come from the USS John P. Merthyr, a Navy vessel already on station at the recovery site. When the capsule hits the water, divers enter the ocean, approach the capsule, and open the hatch from the outside. The crew does not exit into open water. They are helped from their seats onto a large inflatable platform the recovery team calls the front porch. From there, helicopters lift them to the ship. That sequence, divers to hatch to front porch to helicopter, is the final phase of a 10-day mission. It is also the phase that depends most heavily on conditions the crew cannot control: sea state, wind, visibility, the location of the capsule relative to the ship. The recovery director for tonight's mission is Liliana Villarreal. She called into the April 8th press briefing from aboard the USS John P. Merthyr, already at sea, already positioned, already running through contingency protocols with her Team M. She described the recovery operation with the calm specificity of someone who has thought through every scenario. Favourable weather was expected. The sea state was projected to be manageable. The forecast showed a 20% chance of rain and winds between 7 and 15 miles per hour at splashdown time. Those are good conditions, not perfect. Good. Villarreal used a phrase during that briefing to describe the protocol her team would follow if conditions shifted unexpectedly. She did not spend time on it. She mentioned it, moved on, and left it sitting there without explanation. The phrase was contingency egress. She did not elaborate. Everything discussed so far has been mechanical, metal and heat and physics, systems that can be tested, modified, and cleared to fly. Problems that have engineering solutions, different trajectories, better materials, more parachutes, more divers. The next problem does not have an engineering solution yet. It has 4 names: Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, Jeremy Hansen. For 10 days, the danger to this crew was framed in terms of hardware: the heat shield, the trajectory, the parachutes, the recovery conditions. Those are the dangers that get discussed at press conferences because they are the dangers that engineers can quantify, model, and address with data. But there is a second category of danger on a mission like this one. It does not show up on a heat sensor. It does not trigger an alarm in mission control. It accumulates silently, invisibly inside the bodies of the people making the trip. And its full effects will not be known for weeks, possibly months after splashdown. The crew of Artemis II spent 10 days outside the Van Allen belts. Most people have never heard of the Van Allen belts, but they are one of the most important things standing between human life and deep space. They are 2 massive rings of magnetically trapped radiation that surround Earth, shaped roughly like a donut around the planet's equator. They are generated by Earth's magnetic field, and they act as a radiation shield, deflecting and capturing the high-energy particles that stream constantly from the Sun and from deep space beyond our solar system. The International Space Station orbits at approximately 250 miles above Earth's surface. That altitude sits comfortably inside the Van Allen belt's protection. The astronauts aboard the ISS receive elevated radiation doses compared to people on the ground, but they are still partially shielded, still inside the magnetic envelope that Earth generates around itself. Artemis II travelled 252,756 miles from Earth. At that distance, there is no magnetic envelope, no belt, no shield of any kind between the crew and whatever the Sun decides to do. During the mission, the Sun was not quiet. Sunspot Region A, R4409, a magnetically complex region carrying what scientists call a beta-gamma configuration, was actively producing flares throughout the mission window. NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center was monitoring it continuously. A beta-gamma sunspot is not a routine feature. It carries opposing magnetic polarities in close proximity, creating the kind of magnetic tension that can release suddenly and violently in the form of a major solar flare. A major solar flare from a region like AR4409 can accelerate charged particles to a significant fraction of the speed of light. Those particles travel from the Sun to Earth in minutes, not hours, minutes. And unlike the visible light of a flare, which takes 8 minutes to reach Earth at the speed of light, the particle radiation arrives with almost no warning. The maximum alert time a crew in deep space would have received from NASA's monitoring systems is approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes to prepare for a radiation dose that, in a worst-case event, could exceed an astronaut's safe annual radiation limit in a single exposure, the equivalent of hundreds of chest X-rays, delivered to the whole body, simultaneously. The crew trained for this. On Flight Day 8, the crew used onboard supplies and equipment to assemble a makeshift radiation shelter inside the capsule, stacking water containers, food storage, and equipment bags around their seats to add mass between themselves and the direction of incoming solar particles. Water is one of the best radiation-absorbing materials available on a spacecraft, precisely because it is already aboard in large quantities. The shelter was not a permanent installation. It was a drill. A test of whether the crew could construct meaningful protection quickly enough to matter if AR4409 fired during the mission. AR4409 did not fire a major event during the Artemis II transit. The crew was not exposed to a worst-case solar particle event. That is the good news. The bad news is that space radiation does not require a solar flare to be dangerous. Galactic cosmic rays pass through the capsule walls, through water, and through human tissue. There is no shield for them. Beyond the Van Allen belts, The background radiation environment is fundamentally different from anything experienced on Earth or aboard the ISS. Galactic cosmic rays, high-energy particles originating from outside our solar system, from supernova explosions and other extreme events across the galaxy, stream through deep space in all directions constantly. Unlike solar particle events, they cannot be predicted. They cannot be sheltered against with any practical amount of material available on a spacecraft. They pass through metal, through water, through human tissue. They do not kill quickly. They accumulate. Each day beyond the Van Allen belts adds to a cumulative dose. It affects DNA. It increases long-term cancer risk. It can damage the central nervous system over time. A 10-day mission to the moon and back represents a radiation exposure that ISS astronauts, even on 6-month stays, do not accumulate, because the ISS never leaves the magnetic protection that surrounds low Earth orbit. The Mach experiment, short for Matryoshka Astro-Rad Radiation Experiment, was aboard Orion throughout the mission. It measures the radiation environment inside the capsule continuously, using sensors distributed across a model that approximates the geometry of a human body. When the capsule is recovered and the Mach data is downloaded, scientists will have a precise picture of exactly what this crew was exposed to, at what times, in what body regions, across all 10 days. Mission scientists said before splashdown that they were particularly eager to analyze one specific data point from the Mach experiment. They would not say which one, and now consider what the crew experienced in the final hours of the mission, on top of 10 days of deep space radiation exposure. They have been in microgravity for 10 days. In microgravity, the human body changes quickly. Fluid shifts toward the head, muscles weaken from disuse, bones lose density at a rate measurable in days, not months. The cardiovascular system adapts to a world without gravity, meaning the heart does not have to work as hard to push blood upward against gravitational pull. That adaptation, over 10 days, is significant. And then reentry, the same 3.9 Gs, applied to a cardiovascular system that had spent 10 days forgetting what gravity feels like, applied to muscles that have weakened, applied to a body that has been absorbing radiation at deep space levels for 10 days. No crewed mission since the Apollo program has put a human body through that specific combination of stresses. The ISS crews returned through low-G reentry after 6 months in microgravity, but from low Earth orbit, not deep space. The Apollo crews returned from deep space, but the medical monitoring available in the 1960s and 1970s was a fraction of what exists today. The data from tonight's crew, collected in the hours after splashdown, will be the most detailed picture ever assembled of what deep space transit does to a human body. That data will not determine whether this mission was a success. It already was before the medical team arrived. What it will determine is whether the people who come after this crew, the Artemis I crew, the people who will actually land on the moon, can do it safely. Their mission design, their radiation shielding specifications, their re-entry protocols, their post-landing medical support, all of it depends on what the doctors find when they examine this crew in the medical bay of the USS John P. Murtha. What those doctors find starts a clock for the next mission, and there is one test being administered to this crew tonight that has not been performed on astronauts returning from beyond the Van Allen belts in the modern era. The last humans to receive it came back from the moon in 1972. Their results were not made fully public for years. There is a simple version of what just happened. 4 people went to the moon. The most dangerous part of bringing them home is the final 13 minutes. The rocket worked, the heat shield held, the parachutes opened, the recovery team was waiting. Everyone is safe. That version is true, and it matters enormously. Do not let anything that follows diminish it. But there is a second version that is also true, and it is the version that will shape the next decade of human spaceflight more than any celebration will. Artemis II was not a mission to the moon, it was a question. A very specific, very expensive, very carefully constructed question directed at every system involved in sending human beings beyond Earth's protection and bringing them home alive. The question was not, can we do this? The question was, do we understand this well enough to do it again, with people standing on the surface? Those are different questions. The first one was answered on this mission. The second one is still being worked out. NASA Flight Director Rick Henfling said something at the April 8th press conference that deserves more attention than it received. He said, "When the mission goes well, it can look like flying to the moon is easy. It certainly is not." Henfling is the man who ran the re-entry from Houston. He watched the signal go dark. He counted the minutes. He heard the crew come back. And the night before all of that happened, his instinct was not to celebrate. His instinct was to remind anyone listening that ease is an illusion, that a clean mission conceals the complexity underneath it, that the gap between it worked and we understand why it worked is exactly where the next accident lives. Lakeisha Hawkins, NASA's Deputy Associate Administrator, said it a different way at the same briefing. "We can't forget," she said, "that this is a test flight, not a triumph, not a milestone crossed and left behind. A test, with data still being collected, with results still being analysed, with conclusions still weeks away from being drawn. Here is what the next few hours actually contain." Hours after splashdown, NASA holds a press conference at Johnson Space Center in Houston. That briefing is the moment when the program stops performing confidence and starts reporting results. Engineers will have had their first look at the capsule, recovery teams will have initial data from the heat shield inspection, the first medical assessments of the crew will have been completed aboard the USS John P. Murtha. What they say at that briefing will not be the full story. That takes weeks. But it will be the first honest accounting of what this mission actually produced. The heat shield is the centerpiece of that accounting. When the recovery team opens the capsule and examines the avcoat surface, they will be looking for one thing above all others: the pattern of ablation, uniform or uneven, controlled or chunked. The same question engineers asked after Artemis I, now asked again under different conditions, with a modified trajectory, with a crew aboard. If the ablation pattern is clean, if the modified trajectory solved the problem, then the path to Artemis III is clearer. The design holds, the timeline advances, the crew that will actually walk on the moon moves closer to their launch date. If the pattern shows the same uneven chunking seen after Artemis I, even partially, even in a smaller area, then the conversation changes. Not necessarily a return to the drawing board, but a longer conversation, a harder one. With a new shield already being manufactured for Artemis III, the question becomes whether that shield is enough, or whether the trajectory needs further modification, or whether some combination of both is required before humans can be safely landed on the lunar surface. The difference could come down to what engineers find on that heat shield pulled from the Pacific Ocean. Artemis III is planned to land humans on the moon for the first time since December 1972. That is 54 years. 2 generations. Most of the people watching this video were alive the last time a human being stood on the lunar surface. Some of them watched it happen live. They know what that moment looked like. Grainy black and white footage, a fragile figure in a white suit, footprints in grey dust. The next crew to make those footprints has not been named. NASA has not announced the Artemis III crew. Their identities, their training, their mission design, all of it is downstream of data that does not fully exist yet. Data being collected right now. Data sitting in the MARE experiment waiting to be downloaded. Data in the medical records being written in the ship's medical bay. Those unnamed astronauts are the real audience for everything that happened on this mission. Every system that was tested, every number that was recorded, every measurement that was taken, it was taken for them. So that when they sit inside their own capsule, their own Orion, with its new heat shield, on a trajectory refined by everything learned on this mission, the people who put them there will have done everything that could be done to bring them home. What researchers found when they looked closely at the Artemis I data was not reassuring, but it was honest. And honesty is what the program needed. 4 years of hard, unglamorous, deeply unsexy engineering work followed that honesty. This mission was the first test of whether that work was enough. This crew did not just complete a mission. They became the most thoroughly monitored human beings ever to return from deep space. Every radiation reading, every cardiovascular measurement, every bone density scan, every reaction time. Everything goes into the record. Everything shapes what comes next. There is a phrase used inside NASA that does not appear in press releases or public statements very often. It describes what a test flight actually produces when everything goes right. The phrase is inherited confidence. The idea that the crew coming after you flies with more certainty because you flew first, because you showed the system what it could do, because you handed the next team data instead of assumptions. That is what this mission was, not the destination, the foundation. 4 people went farther from Earth than any human in 56 years. They came home through fire, through silence, through a parachute sequence no human hand could touch. And when they step out of that capsule, they hand the next crew something more valuable than a record. A roadmap. Whether it is complete, we will not know for weeks. The heat shield data tells one part, the radiation readings tell another, the medical results tell the rest, but the crew is home, the capsule is in the water, and somewhere in Houston, NASA will begin telling the world what they found. That is where the next chapter starts.